Saturday, June 24th. We're here in New York City at the Palace Hotel. This interview is really the next step in a 10-year project we've been working on together. It's been a journey of remembrance. It's your experience in the Holocaust. I guess the best place to start is probably at the beginning. So when and where were you born?
I was born on March 12th, 1927. I will be celebrating my 80th birthday next year. The city I was born in is Karlsruhe. It's in Germany, in the province of Baden. It was a good town.
How big?
Roughly at that time, 150,000 inhabitants. Approximately 3,000 Jewish people lived there.
Was it a tight-knit community of Jews?
Really, Jewish people felt they were Germans. My father did, so did many Jews. So there wasn't that tight of a Jewish community as you will find nowadays in New York or any other part of the city, of the country.
And did you have a lot of friends and family there?
My mother's family lived there, part of my father's family lived there, and we had many friends there, yes.
What were some of your happiest memories?
I guess the outings I had with my parents and my sister. My mother started, I think it was something like Thursday, to prepare for these Sunday outings. We had a car, which was a luxury at that time, and mother baked and cooked for days. And then 6 o'clock in the morning, we packed everything in the car and went somewhere, mostly to the Black Forest. And I recall my dad, we had two baskets. One was for the picnic and one was for the car. And my sister and I, we used to bet how many corners my father would turn before he would ask my mother, "Can I have a sandwich, please?" So we ate all the way to the picnic and then started the picnic.
And ate again.
And ate again.
And you had a lot of friends?
I had a lot of friends. I think I had so many friends because of my father. Because my father was a wonderful storyteller. And we used to sit for hours and hours listening to the stories. And my father did not only take us to Fantasyland, he acted the stories out. And he was telling us something about Turks. And we had some towels around our heads and toothbrushes. And so my friends were very anxious to spend time in our house.
And you think he was the reason why?
I think so.
Yeah. He was a German. He was a Jew. Did he consider himself first a German or first a Jew?
My father considered himself first a German. He was in apprenticeship when the First World War in 1914 broke out. He was in Switzerland. He returned to Germany. He was blind on one eye, but he still volunteered for the army. He served for 4 years in the army. He was a telegraph. I think you would call it Morse code now.
Communication specialist.
Communication specialist, yeah. He had 3 brothers. As a matter of fact, 4 brothers. All of them served in the army. One of his brothers fell. This is a family photo, and you can see only 3 of them. The 4th one fell in the war.
And they were all German soldiers
They were
fighting
all
for
German
Germany.
soldiers
All
fighting for
Jews.
Germany, all Jews. In the cemetery in Karlsruhe, there is to date still a tableau with the names of the fallen soldiers. And my uncle's name is on it, Leopold Hirsch. And on this tableau is written, Der Dank des Vaterlands sei dir gewiss. The thank of the fatherland will always be yours. And that was Jewish people believed. And my father never in his wildest dreams would have believed that his friends and would turn against him in 1938 and 39. He always believed that Nazism wouldn't survive. He always believed it will change.
Mm-hmm.
People will wake up.
He was a proud German.
He was a proud German, yes.
Why don't we talk a little bit about your mother, Lena?
My mother was a wonderful woman. My mother was born a Protestant, came from a Protestant family, and when she married, she accepted the Jewish faith. She was strict. She was the disciplinarian in our house, but extremely caring woman who stood by my father through thick and thin.
She ran the household.
She ran the household.
Right. So Max was a Jew. Lena was Protestant, converted to Judaism. How did these two come to meet?
I really don't know. But they had the same interests. Both loved music, both loved theater. So my sister and I, we imagined that they met through mutual friends.
And would you say that they were in love?
Definitely.
Now, given that you had parents who come from both two different backgrounds, which religion did you identify with most?
Judaism. There was no question about it. I like to go to synagogue. Went very often on Friday nights and Saturday mornings to synagogue. The majority of my friends were Jewish. I had a couple of non-Jewish friends, but most of them were Jewish. Mm-hmm. And I just related to Judaism.
And you had a sister, Ruth, who
My
was an
sister Ruth,
older sister.
She's 5 years older.
She had more Gentile
she had more
friends,
Gentile
right?
friends.
Mm.
And as a matter of fact, my sister married a Gentile mm-hmm. and brought her children up as Gentiles.
Were you close?
We didn't know each other really well because I was 11 when my sister left. And she lived, I believe, for 1 year with my aunt, whose husband has passed away. So I really didn't know her very well.
Mm-hmm. How were you the same? How were you different?
She was 5 years older. So she was already in the beginning of dating stage. Mm-hmm. And my mother always insisted that she drag me along. And now I realize it must have been terrible for her having to drag a sister who's 5 years younger when you go and want to meet boys.
When did you first become aware as a child of anti-Semitism?
I guess I must have been 10 years old in 1937.
Do you remember the incident?
Yes, when I could read in restaurants and stores, when I saw the sign, Jews are not wanted here. When I looked at newspapers and saw ugly caricatures of Jewish people, when slowly the circle of my parents' friends diminished. This must have been around 37 years.
How did looking at those signs in the restaurants make you feel?
It was hard for me to understand because I felt that being a Jew was a religion and I was a German.
And how did you act in response to it?
I became intimidated when my parents kept on telling me, don't make rishes.
Rishis
Is a Jewish word for don't be noticed.
Yiddish word.
A Yiddish word for, don't be noticed. Don't do anything which people will pay attention to. Don't say anything which we discussed at home. Don't volunteer to things. Just melt into
Be anonymous.
anonymous. Yeah.
What kind of impact?
It
did
had
that
an
have?
impact on all my life.
Yeah.
It took a long time to gain self-esteem. It took a long time not to shudder and be scared when the doorbell rang at night. To date, seeing uniforms bother me. Passing through immigration or custom worries me.
What was your first indication that anti-Semitism was on the rise, so that it was more than just caricatures in newspapers and signs in restaurants saying you could not be there?
When my parents' Gentile friends started to pull back from them, when my mother's sister told my mother that I could not babysit her son anymore. My uncle was a civil servant, and in 1937 the Nuremberg laws became law, and civil servants were forbidden to communicate with Jews. It broke my mother's heart having to tell me this after having babysat him for quite a while.
In 1935, you were attending a German school. You were in a mixed classroom. And in 1935, you were forced to leave that school and attend another German school, which had classrooms reserved specifically for Jews.
This was traumatic. Leaving, I started school in 1933, so I went 2 years to this school, had lots of friends, and I don't recall how I was told, but I just recall that neither my friends, my Gentile friends, nor myself could understand why I had to leave that school. The school was much further. I had to take the bus, and it was a traumatic experience.
Were you angry?
I was angry. I just couldn't understand it. Then in the Liddell school, we could not start at the same time as German children. We had to come later to school. Our breaks were different. School closing was different. Just not that the German children did not get in contact with Jewish children. Needless to say, name calling.
Do you remember the names that they were calling you?
In translation, it would be Jewish pig. Saujude.
Saujude.
Beatings didn't happen to me personally, but it happened to other children. I was a big girl, and I think
not easy target.
Not an easy target, no.
And then later, November 2nd, 1938, you were forced to leave the Liddell school, which had segregated classrooms, and attend school in a Jewish-only school and building. Was that a different feeling, this move? Was it a relief?
It was a wonderful feeling. Mm. It was great. You be with your own people. At that time, even so we were 10, 12 years old, we knew what went on. And some fathers of some children were already taken to concentration camps, and we could talk about it and console each other. And people didn't call you names. Mm-hmm. It was there was a shortage of teachers, so our classes were shortened. But it was a relief.
Only a few days after, less than a week, was November 7th, 1938. You're now 11 years old, and your family gets a really troubling message from a neighbor. Who was the neighbor?
The neighbor was the wife of an SS man. We had, as a matter of fact, years ago I babysat that baby too, and all of a sudden we saw the man in uniform. We didn't know he was an SS man. We had very good neighbors in that house, very nice people. And she came to the door, and my mother opened the door, and she said, "My husband says for you to leave immediately."
And this was a friendly message?
A friendly message. It was a warning.
How did your family feel in this moment?
Fear? Why would we have to leave? But we took the message very serious. We took just one small suitcase and went to my mother's parents' house.
2 days later was November 9th, 1938. It's a date that is infamous in history, known as Kristallnacht, the night of the broken glass. Where were you and your family at this time?
My grandfather was on his deathbed. And I believe that my grandmother and grandfather must have talked about if ever anything happened to us, that we could move into their house, because it was such a normal thing to do. The room on the top is where we hid. The night of November 9th, we were at my grandparents' apartment listening to the radio.
What did you hear on the radio?
That there was unrest amongst Germans, that some stores had been the windows had been broken in some stores. My sister and I took a bicycle. My sister Ruth and I, we had a bicycle at Grandma's house, and we drove to the synagogue. And we saw the synagogue in flames. It was night. We saw Torahs being thrown in the center of the street, prayer books being thrown.
Who was doing this?
Again, many Germans.
Were they uniformed Germans?
No.
They were dressed in civilian clothes.
Yes. From there, we went to an area where we knew there were Jewish stores. It wasn't far from where my grandparents lived. And there we saw lots of SA men. You call them brown shirts, I think.
These were uniformed
Brown
Germans.
shirts. And again, Germans vandalizing stores, breaking windows with big white paint. They marked Jew on it. Germans went in and took the merchandise, and some Jewish businessmen stood there helpless. They were taken away. They just collected them like pieces and took them away.
Who took them away?
Well, the SA men.
The men in the brown shirts?
The men in the brown shirts.
Presumably there's people watching, Germans. What are they doing?
Some stood there very silently. Others jeered.
Cheered?
And I think their aim was to get in those stores and take the merchandise.
The next day, after Kristallnacht, your grandfather had passed away, and the same day you also got a report from your
My aunt.
aunt. Your aunt.
My Aunt Friedel, who was married to the civil servant, she told us that a neighbor came to her. She lived in the same apartment complex as where we lived, and just a few houses away from us. And a neighbor, our next door neighbor, came to her and told her that a cattle truck, one of those trucks you carry animals in, stopped in front of our apartment building, and they came and knocked at our door to pick up my father. At that time, and the neighbor said, well, they left quite some time ago. And maybe she saved my father's life. The truck went away.
Do you know where the truck went?
To pick up. At that time, they picked up most of the male Jews. I think they picked them up for the boys from the age of 14. They picked them up, brought them to the police, and sent them to Dachau.
Which was?
Which was a concentration camp next to Munich. A much smaller version than it later on became.
Do we know what happened to them?
Yes, they were released. After a few months, they were released and sent back home. They just ran out of space in that camp.
How old were you at this time?
I was 11.
11 years old.
11 years old.
You see the synagogue in flames. You see the Torah being trampled.
Yeah.
You see the storefronts of Jewish businessmen broken in. How are you feeling at this moment?
Terrible. Just terrible.
You're afraid?
Yeah.
You're afraid for your life?
Yeah.
You're afraid for your family?
And my grandfather lying there, dying. So not only did my mother witness her father dying, but witnesses her family being threatened.
Must have felt like the world was coming in.
Just terrible.
You told me, or you wrote in your memoirs, that the school you had just moved into, the all-Jewish school, had also been burned down.
Yeah.
Where did you go? What happened next? Did your education continue? Did it stop?
Well, they kept in the Jewish Community Center, which was next to the synagogue. There was a building. And they had two rooms, set them up as classrooms. I think at that time we must have been maybe still 90 or 100 children. I believe we had 2 teachers. So we had very shortened hours in school. But it continued.
What did your father, your family do to try to get out of the country? You must have wanted to leave desperately.
My father tried before November 38 to join his brother in Colombia. As a matter of fact, I have a letter which he wrote in Spanish asking for a visa. Hitler wanted Jews to leave. However, he made it very difficult, because in the meantime, he confiscated their business and their money. Going into another country required money. Other countries had their own economic problems. They really didn't want to take a group of people, thousands of them, into their country. So countries restricted their visas.
They were primarily Jews of means, wealthier Jews who...
Exactly. They had money, they could buy visas. When you had money, there was a lot of things you could do.
So by this time in Germany, most of the Jews who were left were Jews who did not have
not
the
have the
means.
means to go. And where would they go? Where could they go?
No one wanted them.
No one wanted them.
Despite his failed efforts at getting a visa from Colombia and other countries, your parents were, in the meantime, making arrangements for your sister and you to leave the country. Your sister was 16
My
at the
sister
time.
was
You were
16.
11.
I was 11, yes.
What were they telling you?
They felt it would be best if we would go to another country until we received a visa from Colombia, because they were very convinced that we got that visa, that we will get this visa. So basically, we were under the impression that we are going to another country until they get a visa, then they would pick us up on the way to Colombia.
How did you feel about this?
I really didn't want to leave my parents. I was 11.
So December 13th, 1938, your sister was the first to leave. She was sent on what was called a Kindertransport
To England, yeah.
Harwich, England, right?
Yeah.
How were the arrangements made?
It was made through the Jewish community. They selected, needless to say, the lists were long, and they selected names, and my sister's name was selected.
Do you remember that day that
Yeah.
she left?
Yeah. We went, and really, we were still hopeful going to Colombia. My parents, I would imagine, put a big front on for us. But I recall my parents saying to my sister, well, we'll pick you up on the way to Colombia.
Do you remember thinking to yourself that you might not see her again?
Didn't enter my mind, no. I always thought I would see her again, yeah.
And when was the next time you heard news from your sister after she left?
We heard via the Red Cross a few months later. We knew she was in England. This is a letter which my sister wrote, and she says, somewhere in Germany, a girl of 16 years tosses and turns, trying to sleep. My mother came to wake me about 6 o'clock, packing my small suitcase and getting me ready to the railway station for a journey into the unknown. I was born a Jew. My father was able to obtain a ticket to my freedom on a Kindertransport to England, hoping that perhaps one of us would survive. I had a non-Jewish family on my mother's side. Also, my mother became Jewish when she married. We lived in a flat, but a few days before my departure, we were warned that the Gestapo would come and arrest my father. We left everything and found shelter at my grandparents' house. Never will I forget if the doorbell rang. Will it be them? My parents came with me to the station. At the station, a few families were saying goodbye to their children. The train pulled in, we got on, and that was that. Not even time to wave goodbye. The train was full of children from Austria. As soon as we got in, our suitcases were taken from us, emptied, and anything of value taken away. Some of us had bits of jewelry tucked away, but we never saw them again. The journey to Holland seemed very long, but what a relief when we reached the border. The Nazi guards left us, shouting abuse and Heil Hitler. The Dutch were wonderful, greeting us with hot drinks and food. The journey on the ship Amsterdam is still a mystery to me. I know it was a long night. On arrival at Harwich, we were cleared by the port authorities, and the label 6073 was put around my neck. I still have it amongst my treasures. Loris took us to Dovercourt Holiday Camp. It was terribly cold and snow on the ground. We were given a bunk in a holiday chalet. We then marched to huge hangars where there were a few stoves to give us a bit of warmth. Sandwiches were piled up on huge tables. I can still see the snow falling through the roof and settling on them. Many children cried. I cannot remember when and how I went to sleep. We missed our families. Would we ever see them alive again? I thank God I never had to say goodbye to my children and that they were spared this terrible experience. I'm now 75 years old, but that day I will never forget.
About a month after your sister left on the Kindertransport, you were scheduled for your own transport to Holland, but that transport never left.
No, we received a message that diphtheria broke out in this camp and that the trip was cancelled.
What do you think would have happened had you gone on the transport?
Jason, I wouldn't be sitting with you.
Children living in Holland at that time did not survive?
No, they were all killed.
In the end, you never left Germany,
No.
but your education still continued despite all the hardships.
In those two classrooms with our two teachers, yes.
What was the mood among your classmates at this time?
Well, sad. Very sad because fathers were picked up again by the Gestapo. People tried to hide. I recall my teacher telling us, if ever someone comes into the classroom and picks me up, just put on your coats and go home. And it happened. And that's the last time I saw the teacher. And we just put on our coats and did what he said, go home.
So all this time, things are getting increasingly more difficult for Jews. The Nuremberg laws were increasing. You had to wear a star, a yellow star. What was the reason for the star as far as you understood it?
To identify the Jew immediately.
Where did you have to wear it?
I had to wear it right on my left side.
It was
It was a
made out
yellow
of-
star, the size of my hand. It had to be sewn on and had to be worn
At
by
all
all
times.
Jews all the time.
You mentioned in your memoirs that people would give you different kinds of looks.
Yeah.
Some Germans would look at you with sympathy.
Yeah.
That's true.
I would like to say not all Germans were Nazis. We had experience with neighbors and friends who just objected totally to the system, but they were afraid for their own lives. Other Germans looked gleeful at you, others spit at you.
You were spat on?
Yeah.
Do you remember the faces of those who...
Young people, Hitler Youth type of boys who I guess wanted to show off. And again, the word Judenschwein, Jewish pig, came
Well, it
into the
must have been
picture.
an awful insult.
You
I just-
felt marked. You felt different. You were just not accepted.
What happened to the star?
To my star? I really don't recall. You keep things for a long time, and then somehow I must have most likely given it to someone or showed it to someone. I don't have that star anymore.
But you do have
But I have
an identification
my
papers?
identification paper. And you had to carry it with you all the time. And needless to say, in front, you have the big J, which before you open the identification paper, you know you're a Jew.
So that J stood for
For
Juden.
Jew. And then you will notice that I signed it Judith Sarah Hirsch. every Jewish female had to carry the name Sarah, and every male had to carry the name Israel. So when you had any correspondence to do, just by looking at the signatures, was it identified that you were a Jew. One of the Nuremberg's law was that we were not allowed, that we were on curfew. Mm-hmm. We had to be home by 8 at night in the summer, 9 o'clock at night. We were not allowed to, first we had to take the back entrance of a streetcar. We were not allowed to sit when there was a German standing. We were only allowed to sit when nobody was standing. And then 6 months later, we were not allowed to use the streetcar.
You had to walk everywhere.
We had to walk wherever we went.
September 15th, 1939, your father, Max, leaves for Munich. Why did he leave Karlsruhe? Why did he leave you and your mother in Karlsruhe?
The war broke out. And we lived very close to the French border. And my father felt that if something happens to Jews, it would be around that area. And he was right. Where we lived, the first transport to concentration camp Jews happened from there. So the Jewish community also suggested that if possible, you go further into the country. And he found through the Jewish community a job as a janitor in Munich in a Jewish hospital. He took it immediately and went to Munich. In 1938, before my father went to Munich, he was forced to work as a Jew on a garbage dump.
In Karlsruhe?
In Karlsruhe. And it was hard work, far away. At that time, we still could own a bicycle, so he bicycled in the morning to the dump and cleared the garbage dump. And my father was a businessman and a poet.
Educated.
And very educated person.
Well-read
person. And but he was an optimist. He did it. He didn't complain. He didn't say, "Oh, I'm so tired, I can't do that." No, he was an optimist, and he just made the best out of the present situation.
January 15th, 1940, you and your mother left for Munich to rendezvous with...
We got permission and to join my father in Munich,
Who gave you the permission?
Must have been the Gestapo.
Had you had contact with your father regularly during this time?
Yes. There was mail service and we had,
You were excited to see him?
Oh my God, yes.
Were you concerned that you weren't going to see him?
Once you separate, when somebody's away from you, you do worry. You don't admit it, but you do worry. And I'm sure my mother must have worried immensely.
Where did you all live when you were there?
We had a one-room apartment in the basement of this Jewish hospital. My mother worked as a cleaning lady there, and my father was a janitor.
And what were the conditions like in this apartment?
We were together.
That's all that mattered?
That's all that mattered.
Did you have a kitchen?
We had a kitchen in one room. I slept in the kitchen, and my parents had a room.
And at the hospital, you met some people there that would have a big impact later on.
Yeah.
Who were some of those people?
One of them was Dr. Spanier. He was in charge of the hospital. A wonderful man who was so concerned about his patients. And
He was a Jewish doctor.
He was a Jewish doctor there.
And Mr. Rosen was one of the patients there?
Mr. Rosen was a young man. He was a double amputee, and I imagined that he had diabetes and was amputated. He was a wonderful man. That time he must have been maybe 30, full of joy. I used to visit him when I came back from school and told him what happened in school. And he was, again, a very optimistic, wonderful person. Lots of laughter, lots of fun.
What did you do for school? What was your education like at this time?
Well, it was similar to the Karlsruhe experience, few classrooms in an apartment building, less and less children showed up, more and more tried to go into hiding and try to still escape.
You have a photo of some of your classmates?
When I was 14, or when Jewish children became 14, the education had to terminate. So these are the girlfriends who turned 14, except for one, all were murdered.
Mm-hmm.
Dora Schmidt.
And at the age of 14, March 1941, you left the school. That was
it
for your formal education?
For my formal education.
You weren't allowed to pursue?
No.
Soon afterwards, you started an apprenticeship at a children's home.
Yes.
Children's home was called?
Das Antonienheim.
Das Antonienheim.
Das Antonienheim, yeah.
What was it? It
was founded in 1926, and it was meant to be a haven for orphans and underprivileged children. And it turned out to be a home for children who lived in smaller towns, outskirts of Munich. It had maybe 60 children. It wanted the height was roughly 60 children.
What was your role there?
Huh? My role, I was there as apprenticeship to learn home economics. Basically, I was very occupied in the kitchen.
Mm-hmm. You liked it there?
I loved it because I love children, and whenever I had a free minute, I went up to the nursery and the kindergarten area and spent my time with the children.
Tell me about some of the people who work there.
Well, Alex Bendix was the woman in charge. A very brave, admirable woman, because she had the possibilities, even in 1941, to leave Germany. And she said, as long as there's a Jewish child who needs help, I will not leave. She was a wonderful woman.
There were others?
Yes, I recall Hedwig Jacobi. She was an elderly lady. She was a kind grandma type of woman. Alice Bendix was the strict one. Mm-hmm. And she was, Hedwig Jacobi was a wonderful lady. You could go with her when you had a little problem or something, and she helped you out.
And in the kitchen you worked with?
In the kitchen I worked with a wonderful woman. Her name was Amalia Holzinger. And she taught me all the little tricks and traits of cooking, which I'm still using. I'm in charge of the soup kitchen. And many of all those little tricks and traits she taught me are being used today. She was murdered, but her name will live on forever because all those ladies who cook with me know about Mrs. Holzinger, what she taught me. And they are carrying it through.
Obviously, children's home, there were a lot of young children there. I'm going to read some of their names. Maybe you can tell me something about them. Irvin Weil.
Irwin wasn't a small child. Irwin was my boyfriend. He was my first boyfriend who lived there for a little while.
What do you remember about him?
I remember about him that he had a camera and he took forever pictures.
Mm-hmm.
And
Jews were not allowed to have cameras at this time,
No.
were they?
but he had that camera.
He did it
and
anyways.
Took a lot of pictures of us, yeah.
Esther Cohen.
Esther Cohen was a girlfriend of mine. She was a year older. She had polio. She was handicapped, but a very wonderful, lovely girl, and we all loved her.
Werner Gruber.
Werner Gruber was something like 4 or 5 years younger than I was. A very mischievous boy who always wanted to be with the older children, and we really didn't want him around us, but he was there.
Judith Koppel.
She was one of the younger children.
Judith Kahn.
Judith Khan was my favorite. She was the youngest. She was 1 year old and a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful child.
Dora, Hanny, and Bernard Schmidt.
Dora Schmidt is this one girl I showed you in my picture, this cool picture.
Mm-hmm.
She's my age. This is Hanne, and this is Bernard Schmidt.
Mm-hmm.
They were her two siblings. Her mother had passed away, Dora's mother had passed away, and their father was in Palestine trying to get a visas for them to, and the money together for them to come. And unfortunately, Bernard and Hanne Schmidt were murdered in Auschwitz. Dora survived.
Mary Garber.
Mary Garber.
Mary Garber.
Oh God, Mary Garber. She lived.
Point to.
Mary Garber, yeah.
And who's on the left?
And that's me on the left. Mary Garber came to Neuntonienheim when she was 2 years old. So she didn't know any family life. She didn't know her mother. And for her, I was her big sister, and very often I was her mother. And she was just a wonderful girl who, whenever she had a minute, she came and spent with me.
You looked happy in that photo.
And it was taken, we smiled, and it was just taken.
In the summer of 1941, somewhere
the summer
around
of
there.
41, just there. At that time, well, laws and laws came into being, but you just accepted it. I think if all these Nuremberg laws would have been issued at the same time, it would have been a big thing.
Mm-hmm.
But you got so used to, well, you can't do this, and you can't do this, and you can't sit on a park bench, and you can't go for walks, and you can't do this, and you accepted it. Coming back to smiling, Alice Bendix managed to create a wonderful atmosphere in the children's home. We felt so secure, and we felt so safe, and we had so much fun, even in these miserable times. It was just a wonderful place to be at.
But it didn't last.
It didn't last.
November 20th, 1941. You describe in your memoirs, and it's in the history books, deportation of 23 children to Kaunas in Lithuania.
Jason, that's hard to tell you, but I will. I remember around the 18th of November that Alice Bendix told us that 23 children will be sent on a transport. And she gave us the name of those 23 children.
Did you know where they were going on this transport? Did anyone know?
I imagined they're being sent to a ghetto. Being children, they're not going to be sent to what they call a labor camp. I imagined they're being sent to a ghetto. That was in my mind's eye. Judith Copper and Judith Kahn were one of those children. I remember I was allowed to spend a day with them. And I spent the day. At that time, we had 4 small children.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot recall the name of the other 2 children, but we had 4 small children under the age of 3.
Mm-hmm.
And I spent a day with them. And
what did you do with them?
I played with them.
Did you prepare them for their trip? How did you prepare them?
I dressed them.
You dressed them in
I
the
hugged
clothes?
them. It was terrible.
And what happened to Judith Kahn and Judith Koppel?
Let me explain to you. That day, we dressed those children because we were not quite certain. They just said we have the children ready. And I remember we were given tags, name tags, and had to put those name tags around the children's neck, and we put them in their best clothes, and we packed a little backpack or a little suitcase for them. And we didn't know the time when they would pick them up, so we dressed them early, and we took them all to the dining room with the other children, and we sat there and tried and played and keep them occupied. We had prepared goodie bags for them. I don't know how Alice Bendix found chocolate and little fruit or whatever she found. She managed to. And we had their favorite toy next with the luggage. And we sat in this dining room or living room and waited. And then the smaller children became restless. We put them back into bed, but we had to keep them dressed because we still didn't know when they would come and pick them up. And late at night, a bus arrived. It drove into the backyard of that Antonienheim.
Who showed up on the bus? Was it just a driver? Were there guards there?
No, there were people in civilian clothes. It was the Gestapo.
It was the Gestapo?
Yeah.
And you knew this at the time, that it was the Gestapo?
Well, yes. You knew Gestapo. No uniform, you knew Gestapo. We have a letter from my boyfriend, Irwin Weil. Irwin is in Milbertshofen. Milbertshofen is a camp which had 2 purposes. It was to house Jews who had to leave their apartments.
Mm-hmm.
And it was also a place which people went through before they were sent to a concentration camp. It was like a holding camp.
This letter that Irwin wrote, it's written when?
This letter which Irwin wrote is written after the war.
To
what
you?
He remembers. No, it's written to Werner Gruber.
Mm-hmm. One of the other children in the home.
One of the other children of the home. I was ordered along with 5 friends to report to Milbertshofen. This was the first time was on November 16, 1941. Muckler, one of the Gestapo people, ordered us again to go to Milbertshofen. We witnessed the arrival of the first truck loaded with men, women, and children, and on the 4th night, we had to remain in Milbertshofen. On that night, the transport was put together. The street to the freight yard was blocked by armed SS men. We helped the old and sick as much as we could, carried their luggage, and supported them. A long train was waiting. Steam escaped from the locomotive. The SS abused and yelled at the people. The people and luggage were pushed into the wagons. There was not enough space. When the people panicked, we were told to throw the luggage out of the train. The remaining people were piled into the compartments. The bus with the 23 children from the Antonienheim arrived. We were ordered to put the children in the train. The children were crying. We tried to comfort them. It was terrible. As long as I shall live, I will never forget the crying and whimpering.
And among those 23 children were...
Among those 23 children was Judith Kahn and Judith Koppel.
They left on this train.
They left on this train,
unknown.
destination unknown.
What do we know now?
We know now that that train went to Kaunas in Lithuania. We know that they were there for roughly the train ride took 2 days. They were murdered, shot in rows of 50, burned, buried.
There's a memorial there now.
A memorial is there now, written by the Germans, and I recall it right, in sadness and deep shame do we mourn the 1,000 Jewish people who were deported from Munich to Kaunas and murdered.
No mention of the children.
There was no mention of the children, and when I saw this, I investigated because I knew those 23 children went, and I heard later on from Werner Gruber that the same memorial is in Munich, and when they realized that they had forgotten to write in Munich, it was changed and added, but nobody ever bothered
in Kaunas.
In Kaunas, and it bothers me. There were children murdered there.
So, you were not aware of this at the time?
No.
You just knew that the children had left?
I knew had left, and in my thank to God, I didn't know at that time. In my mind's eye, they went to a ghetto, which I know was not good, but it certainly never thought would match a concentration camp.
March 1st, 1942.
The second transport.
What do you remember?
Similar situation as in November. The only difference was the children were a little bit older. The remaining children, with the exception of 12 or 13, the caretakers.
Amalia Holzinger was among them?
Maria Holzinger was among them. Alice Bendix and Jacobi were spared on that trip. But Amalia Holzinger and the remaining caretakers and the remaining children were again transported via Milbertshofen to Piaski in Poland. We had some communication with them for a little while, but then it stopped.
April 12th, 1942. What happens?
Well, I fell ill. And was taken to the hospital. I was in the
Where
Jewish
your father
hospital where my father was, and I was
still
there.
working?
Yeah, and that when the Antonienheim was closed, I was told that Esther Cohen and Hedwig Jacobi and Alice Bendix had to inventory whatever was in that home and have it ready for the next tenant. And they were told up they would be picked up and taken to Milbertshofen.
This is the remaining caretakers, Alice Bendix, Hedwig Jacobi. Who
No.
among the children were on this third transport?
On that transport there was still Bernard and Hanni Schmidt. There was Esther Cohn, Werner Gruber, his brother and sister, Mary Garber was still there, yeah. And only Hedwig Jacobi and Alice Bendix.
And where were they sent at this point?
They were taken in a furniture van to Milbertshofen. I have a letter here from Salo Neuwirth. Salo was a good friend of ours too. And he said, I just want to send you a few notes. Yesterday at 8:15 we were transported via furniture truck to Milbertshofen. Judith, meaning me, has to come every morning and every night. Because I was in the hospital at a time when Alice Bendix with the children were sent with the furniture van, I did not go with them to Milbertshofen. And somehow I fell through the cracks.
If you hadn't gotten sick and hadn't...
I would be with them in Milbertshofen. But I still had to report every morning to Milbertshofen and every night to come back.
What do you remember about Milbertshofen?
Not one thing. I don't know Milbertshofen.
It's a blank space in your memory?
It's a total blank space. If I would not seen letters written that I'm there, and it's not only one letter, it's several letters, I would not believe I was there. I carried this picture with me for 60 years, wondering what it was. And only in the year 2004 did I realize it's Milbertshofen. And looking at the picture, I still don't recall it.
This brings back no memory.
No memory at all.
Why do you think you don't remember?
I don't know. I must have seen something so terrible that I just blocked it out. I just don't remember. I'm trying and I look at things and I read about Milbertshofen and I don't recall it.
So the Antonienheim is now empty. 3 transports liquidated it of all the people there, all the people you knew. What became of the place afterwards?
It's adding insult to injury. The Lebensborn, which is an organization, the SS man who fit the ideal of the Aryan, and women who fit that same blonde, blue-eyed personalities, produced children in that home. They got together and produced children for Hitler.
They wanted to create a master race.
I wanted to create a master race.
Soon after you left the Antonienheim, you write in your memoirs that you were reassigned. Who reassigned you, and to what?
Basically, the Aristotelian was responsible for Jews, and they are the ones who reassigned or send you to camps or whatever happens to Jews.
And where were you reassigned by them?
They reassigned me to Lohof. Lohof is not very far from Milbertshofen. Lohof was, we produced flax. We harvested the flax. We
Processed it.
processed the flax, yeah.
What was a day like for you in this time? I mean, was food available? How did-
Little food. First of all, at that time was already that I could not use the streetcar. I had to walk roughly 2 hours a day, one way, to take the train. Then I was in the train trying to hide the Jewish star because I didn't want to be spat at. And one of my wonderful memories of my mother is staying in the trains, waiting the train station for me with a big apple in her hand. And an apple was at that time
a luxury?
a luxury. And beaming and laughing and happy to be able to give me the apple. And very often she walked the 2 hours with me home to the camp.
As a non-Jew, born a non-Jew, your mother, was she in danger because of her connections to you and your father?
Yes, she was. She was. Later on, not at that point, but later on, she was also ordered to some kind of slave labor.
Could she have made her life easier?
She could have.
She had the opportunity to at one point?
She could have. She could have separated from my father, and life would have been easy for her.
What would have happened to you?
My father definitely wouldn't be here. And I might have survived. But our lifeline was my mother.
You wrote about a story in your memoirs where she received orders to appear before the Gestapo.
Yeah. My mother received a letter to appear at a certain day, at a certain time, with me at the Gestapo.
Not with your father?
No. When you go through situations like this, many things don't need to be said because you think alike. My mother thought without telling me, and I thought without telling my mother, that they will take my father away.
While you were at
While we were with him. That
the
was our
Gestapo.
thought. We didn't talk about it.
So you went there?
So we went there, we sat there for several hours. Then finally we were called into the Gestapo. And my mother was told what a good life she could have and I could have if she would separate from my father.
And what did she say?
Let me translate it. She said, and he called him the Sauyut, the pig of a Jew. And my mother was a very brave woman. She said, the pig of a Jew was good enough for me in the good times. And the pig of a Jew is good enough for me in the bad times. No separation. Then they approached me and told me that I could join the Hitler Youth and all kinds of things. And they said to me, urge your mother to separate from your father.
They took you apart separately?
No, in front of her.
In front of her?
Yeah. And, well, my answer was no. So then we were taken back. So he was kind of annoyed, but that was it.
They let you go?
Then we were taken back. We had to sit again for a couple of hours. And again, my mother and I, without talking to each other, had the same thoughts. And we didn't dare and speak to each other because we thought it was bugged.
Thought they were listening?
So then we rushed home, and to our delight, My father was there.
June 3rd and 4th, 1942. Very dark days.
Another terrible, terrible time. We are still in the Jewish hospital.
Mm-hmm.
A few days before, Dr. Spanier advised us that the patients of the Jewish hospital are scheduled to be transported, to be deported.
Whereabouts? Unknown? Known?
Whereabouts unknown. The guess was Theresienstadt. The guess. So on June 3rd, I remember I had long talks with Mr. Rosen,
He was the amputee?
The amputee, and he said, we're going to go in a ghetto, and may not be as luxurious the room as it is in a hospital, but we'll be all right. On June the 3rd, 2 furniture vans arrived.
Not passenger vans, but
furniture vans. And my father and some of the nurses were ordered to bring the patients down and put them in a furniture van. My father begged the Gestapo and asked for permission to put some mattresses on the floor, and they granted it. So first the mattresses were put, and then the patient, one by one, the ones who could walk, walked, and the ones who couldn't walk were carried. My father carried Rosen. That's the first time I saw my father crying, discouraged. And that Mr. Rosen tried to encourage my father. It's not going to be bad. Don't cry. It's not going to be that bad. And they took him away. And on June 4th, there was a repeat of it.
They took another group of patients out. What happened to them?
They're all dead. They were all killed. Most of them died. They were sent to Theresienstadt. Theresienstadt was what it was so called, the spa for Jews,
It was a propaganda
thing. Yes, they didn't gas them at that time. They just died of hunger.
Dr. Spagna was with them?
Dr. Spagna was with them.
He survived?
He survived.
Your father, a big lover of life before all of this, an optimist. This day, how did it affect him?
It affected him terribly. It was a time when my mother and I had usually encouraged Mom and me, and this time my mother and I had to really encourage him to. Life has to go on. We have to go on.
Did he ever speak of this again? Did he ever talk about it? Never afterwards. June 8th, 1942. You were ordered to move from the hospital to the Lindwurmstrasse. What was the Lindwurmstrasse?
Lindwurmstrasse was what they call a Judenhaus. It housed Jews. There were many Judenhouses. It meant by 1930, I think it's one of the Nuremberg laws, that by 1937, if a landlord didn't want to extend a lease for a Jew, he doesn't have to extend it. But those people had to live somewhere. So they, I would imagine, Saracens, created Juden houses. They made some kind of a switch, um, gave the nice apartments to Nazis, and took people out of lesser houses and moved them into where Jews lived. And then when you left, let's say a six-room apartment, you ended up with a room.
Mm-hmm.
And they kept there. The house was totally Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
So it was for many purposes. Another purpose was when you put them on a transport, you just had to go to
one address.
Tierstraße 7 and you picked up 300 people.
Mm-hmm.
So there was not much commotion. There were no neighbors within the building. You just came at night, and with a furniture van, you put them in and bring them to Milbertshofen.
Your mother, at this point, did not go to the Lindwurmstrasse?
No, my mother at that time, we felt it would be best for my mother to find a furnished room and live on the outside. We felt it would be best as far as getting information, as far as maybe food resources. We just felt, and it was a very wise move we made. So we...
she could operate within the normal German
she could
society?
in the normal circumstances. As a matter of fact, she worked as a sales lady somewhere, so that was a wise move we made.
And you saw her often still, or no?
We saw her, yes, we saw her. Lindwurmstrasse was a Judenized. It wasn't a camp yet.
You still had freedom to move around
so
the
we had
city.
freedom to move around. We had to go to work.
Yeah.
So we had freedom to move around. We just were,
But soon afterwards, June 29th, you wrote in 1942 that you moved to Berg am Leim with your father from the Lindwurmstrasse.
Yeah.
What was this place?
Berg am Leim was a cloister. And again, the Gestapo or Regierungsamt took 30 rooms from the nuns and housed between 200 and 250 Jews in these 30 rooms. So men were separated from women, and we housed in double bunk beds, 10, 12 people. And that was the home for a while. The nuns were wonderful people, made life as comfortable as they possibly can. As a matter of fact, they allowed Jews to have services in their church. So it was a very unusual situation, Jews in a Catholic church celebrating Friday night.
Shabbat
night.
You were farther away from your mother?
We were farther away from my mother, further away from Lohof. They started already to put people who had non-Jewish partners. The Germans used to, when you were a child of a mixed marriage, they called you Mischling, which was not a very nice word.
What did it translate as?
Mixed breed, something like this. Not very nice.
Referred to children?
Referred to children of a mixed marriage, yeah. So they started already a lot of Jews had left, were sent on transport, and they're starting now to sort out.
Mm-hmm.
So
sort
out who still has to be on the transport until children or partners of mixed marriages were so far protected from transport, nothing else but from transports.
You have a photo we've already shown, but this is a photo that was taken actually at Berg am Leim with many of the children who were also at the Antonienheim.
Yeah, there is again Werner Gruber and Hannes Schmidt and Bernhard Schmidt, and this was a very close girlfriend of mine. She was murdered.
Where are you in the photo?
I'm right here. This, I would like to read something to you, but I need to instant translation.
It's written in German.
It's written in German.
I want to fold this.
Yeah. It's written in German. It's a page of a calendar. And this calendar was created by high school students in 1987 who had an assignment in their history class. Their teacher gave them an assignment to see what happened in this area where the cloister was located, Bergam-Leim. Bergam-Leim is like an outskirt of Munich. And they did a lot of research, and they came up with certain things. And they came up with a letter which I wrote. We are 4 girls, 2 unmarried ladies, and Ilse's mother. It seems Bergam-Leim will be all right. Lohof was terrible. Besides my work time, I am now 6 hours on the way. At night, I just fall into bed. I'm that tired. I hope it doesn't last too long because I don't know if I can make it. Harry and the Court and the 2 Schwab girls go for a swim in the morning, but this has to be done very secretly because we have curfew and we can only move around a certain area. We cannot go in town. It's close to a prison. We are now 170 persons. Did I write you that Mr. Heckinger was also transported? Esther. I'm referring to Esther Cohen.
Mm-hmm.
Esther, I saw one more time, and I saw her in a train. She was standing on the door in the train which goes to Theresienstadt, because that train passes through Lohof. I was standing there and saw her. Now my last friend has left me. Today it's raining. People speak again of deportation. I wonder what's happening. We still can write letters, but we cannot send parcels and money. Siggy and Hans Nye wrote also to me, and there it must be terrible. They are so hungry and they have nothing to wear. And now we cannot send anything. From the people who went to Theresienstadt, we have heard nothing. God knows what happened to them. Greetings, your girlfriend Judith.
In that letter that you read, you spoke of seeing Esther Cohen leaving on a train to Theresienstadt. Do you remember that moment?
Yeah. Esther Cohen volunteered to go to Theresienstadt because Theresienstadt, with all the propaganda which was made, we believed some of it. And Esther felt that volunteering to Theresienstadt would save her from being sent to a concentration camp.
Did you believe that?
Yes. We didn't know what happened in Theresienstadt. Esther lived a year longer. She was sent from Theresienstadt to Auschwitz and murdered in Auschwitz in 1944. So she lived a year longer in Theresienstadt.
October 1942, you were reassigned from the flax factory in Lohof, and you began working at a battery manufacturing factory. Why do you think your assignment was changed?
I believe something happened in Lohof. I think they closed up or something. It was closed, So or maybe because of winter. I really don't know, but I got a letter from the Regierungsamt that as of Monday, that certain date, I have to report to this company.
What were the work conditions like in the new factory?
It wasn't too bad. It was a factory. It was a combination of, they made telephones and batteries. And we tried as often as we could to do a little bit sabotage, because those batteries were sent up to the front. So sometimes not connecting it or disconnecting it was made us feel good. I don't know if it helped much, but it made us feel good that we thought we did our.
Less than 2 weeks after you were reassigned, the former head of the Antonienheim, Alex Bendix, and some of the other children you knew there were moved to Berg am Leim, including Mary Gaber. And they were moved from Milbertshofen to Berg am Leim, where you were living. But they didn't stay there long.
No. Milbertshofen had served its purpose. Nearly most of the Jews were already transported to concentration camps. They did not need this very large camp anymore. Less and less Jews were housing there. So it was given over to the BMW for their foreign workers. And the people who remained were sent to Berg am Leim. They stayed, I believe, for a few months in Berg am Leim, and then also were transported.
In particular, Alice Bendix and the other children you knew.
Alice Bendix, except for Werner Gruber, Ernest Gruber, and Ruth Gruber, which are children of a mixed marriage, they were sent home. The other 7 or 8 were with Alex Bendix and Hedwig Jacobi, put on the transport list. They were sent to Auschwitz and murdered.
Before they left, did you have a chance to say goodbye?
Yeah.
Do you remember what was said between you?
Just hugs and kisses.
They were afraid? Did they know they were going to Auschwitz?
No, but in the meantime, more news came out of camps, and thanks God, I say again, thanks God, we didn't know about concentration camps. We did not know about the gasings, but we know Jews are being sent away and nobody comes back, that something bad is happening.
Were there other transports?
Every Tuesday morning, a list of between 25 and 50 names was produced. And basically, Berg am Leim was a substitute for Milbertshofen. And they were transported from Berg am Leim. Usually it was 50. It was a train of 50. Most of them went to Theresienstadt. It was just a train which was attached to a regular train.
How come you were not on one of these transports?
because I'm a child of a mixed marriage.
And your father, who was...
And my father was protected because he was married to a non-Jewish woman.
Meanwhile, in Karlsruhe, one of the people who was transported was your uncle, Julius, brother of your father.
Uncle Julius was a very famous football player. He played for the Deutsche Meister. He played in the Olympics for the national team. He was very well known. He was very loved. And in 1935, he was told that he had to leave the club. The club did not tolerate any more Jews.
On March 1st, 1943, he was ordered to report to the train station in Karlsruhe. Do you think he knew what was in store for him?
I believe so. He, again, was married to a non-Jewish woman. They had 2 children, which were probably the age of my sister and myself. They decided as a couple to separate to save their children.
Did it work?
He was murdered in Auschwitz, and the children were sent to Theresienstadt. They survived.
They did survive. So often you didn't receive your orders from the Germans directly. There was a group of people known as the Judenrat, the Jewish Council, who organized a lot of the communications and transports. What did you know of the Judenrat?
Well, I knew there were 4 men, and I recalled their names. And basically, when a transport was put together, the Adressierungsamt or the Gestapo gave a number to those 4 people and said 850 Jews. And those 4 people had this terrible decision to make: who should they select for the transport?
Why did they take these jobs?
They were ordered. They were given these jobs. That's what you do.
You have a letter that you translated from the 4 members of the Judenrat for Munich. Is that correct?
Yes.
You want to read a little bit about what?
This letter was written in Munich, November the 7th, 1941, and is addressed to Mr. Richard Seligman. And here they say re-evacuation. Here they evacuated. By order of the Gestapo and the Munich Police Department, we are herewith informing you that you and the members of your family are selected for the evacuation transport. You and the members are to remain in your apartment as of Tuesday, November the 11th, 1941, and only permitted to leave the apartment with the approval of the Gestapo. Any attempt to escape or of refusal is useless and will be severely punished. Each person is to bring 50 marks in cash, the completed attached form of present financial status, bonds, valuables, personal documents of any kind. The list of contents is to be enclosed, signed by you. Print your name on the envelope. Food stamps are to be taken with you. More information will be given to you or the public authority. The efforts given by our people indicates that by working together, difficult tasks can be resolved. We are therefore in the hope that the people evacuated carry them the same spirit. Karl Israel Stahl, Julius Israel Heckinger, Dr. Joseph Israel Scheler, and Prince Israel Sanger. So people really believed they're going to work camps.
What was the attitude towards those 4 members of the Judenrat who wrote that letter? Was there a feeling of them being collaborators?
You didn't trust them. One name, Hechinger, he somehow fell out of favor, and he was sent to Milbertshofen, and he was terribly treated by the Gestapo. He had to stay in the bottom of a latrine with no equipment and clean it out. He had to run around the periphery of Milbertshofen until he dropped. He was under cold water streams.
Do you remember any speculation why he was being punished?
Maybe he didn't want to be the errand boy anymore. Who knows? He was taken to Auschwitz and murdered.
Soon after Alex Bendix and some of the other children were transported from Berg am Leim to Auschwitz, you and your father were ordered to move back to the Lindwurmstrasse. Why were you moved?
Berg, again, it served its purpose. Now nearly all Jews were gone. Full Jewish people were gone.
Was anyone left at Berg am Leim?
No, it closed. It was given back to the nuns. At that time, now in Lindwurmstrasse, only people who were in a mixed marriage resided there. Somehow, in 1943, since all the Jews, or 99% of Jews were gone, that Arresierungsamt ceased to be. It was dissolved. And somehow we fell for a while, like I said, through the cracks. There was some quietness. There was somehow no new laws came out. We were just like a little forgotten bunch of people.
And you decided at this time to move to the Rumfortstrasse, where your mother was living?
Yeah, so my mother had found a very kind landlord, and he rented her a room and a kitchen in the Rumfortstrasse. And because it eased off a little bit, my mother asked the landlord if he would have any objections, if he would move in with her. And this very kind man said no.
Did the neighbors complain at all?
No. As I said, there were Germans and there were Germans.
There were Germans
and those
and there
were
were
just,
Nazis.
and there were, many of the Germans were Nazis, but some were very nice people.
Must have been a big relief to be able to move in with her and be
what
all together
wonderful,
again.
We had very little to eat, but what a wonderful thing, just eating a soup and sitting around a table and going to bed at night and know in the morning when you wake up, you're alive and you're there. We're all together. It was a wonderful feeling.
You mentioned in your memoirs that the Allies were bombing Munich pretty regularly at this time in 1944. Were you afraid?
No. For us it was a joy, because the more bombs which fell, the faster we thought we'll be liberated. So we as Jews, one of the Nuremberg laws, as Jews, you were not allowed to sit in an official air raid shelter. And the house Rumfortstrasse was an official air raid shelter. So we were not allowed, and we sat in our own cellar. And it was good because they didn't see our grins and smiles when we heard another bomb and when people got all excited. We were very happy.
Do you have any stories
Yeah,
from that time?
I have a story about this time. Um, the man in charge of this arid shelter came down into the cellar and said, "There is a small bomb on the roof. It has not exploded, but it's on the roof." And it was just above our apartment. And he said it needs to, any volunteers, it needs to be removed. And my father and I, we looked at each other and we thought, if that bomb explodes, our home is gone, and where do we stay? So we decided to go up. And my mother was dragging after us, and we took a basket and we put a pillow in that basket and we took this. It was a fire, one of those fire bombs, and it was just stuck in between the roof. And we removed it very slowly and put it in that basket. And we carried the basket and my mother in tow. We carried that basket and we put it across the road. There was a little park. And we put it in that park, and then we ran like mad back to the cellar. And went back to our place. We were invited by many of the neighbors. Please sit with us in the cellar.
After
that
feat,
and we declined, and we thought it was very kind of them, but we declined because we didn't want them to see us being happy when the bombs fall.
You didn't feel you could disguise your happiness during those air raids?
Exactly. Yeah.
February of 1945, this quiet period you talk about in Munich comes to an end. Your father receives a letter to report to the Gestapo in a couple of days. And a day later, you receive the same orders. What did you think in this moment?
This is when we started to get afraid. We knew the war would be finished soon, but taking us into a concentration camp in February 45 was not a good sign.
Did you think about not reporting to the Gestapo?
Yes, we talked about it. My parents and I, we talked about it. It would have not been difficult, but I was afraid if I disappear, what is going to happen to my mother? And would I let my father go alone to a concentration camp? Was out of question.
How could you have disappeared? What were you thinking were your options?
Well, the option would have been sit with other people who had just been bombed out and just sit with them and say, you have no papers. Everything is destroyed.
And pretend you were...
And pretend I was somebody else. It was done. It was done.
What was your mother's reaction to the news?
Well, she was devastated. My father called her sister, who lives in Karlsruhe, and begged her to come and stay with my mother at least for a couple of days until we have to go.
What did you do in those days leading up to the meeting with the Gestapo?
Preparing. My father somehow always had some kind of connections to something. He always managed to get something to trade. And he knew a farmer. And I don't recall how he got a message to that farmer who was kind of nice to us. And the farmer sent his daughter with some food to us to take with us.
You're how old at this point?
I was 17.
17 years old. You're with your father, you're walking to the Gestapo at the Wiltersbacher Palais in Munich. What did you say to each other on the way there?
We just said, we have to be strong. We're not going to cry. We are not going to show fear. We just walked there with our heads high and our suitcase in hand, and that's what we did.
Your father and you arrive at the Gestapo offices. What happens next?
There were some formalities to take care of. I can't recall exactly anymore what it was. But then we were taken to a room, and I found Werner Gruber with his brother and sister and mother there, and some other people I knew. And we just sat there and waited for hours.
Was it comforting to have them there?
It was comforting to see some people you knew there, yeah.
Everyone was afraid, though.
We were all worried. We were very worried.
A new level of anxiety.
New level of anxiety, definitely. After we stayed in this room for several hours, we then, as a group, had to walk with our suitcase in hand and the yellow star. And we, as a group, said, we are not going to cry. We are walking all with our heads up high, and we walked to the station. And my father went a little bit away from the group, and there was a German officer passing by my father, and he whispered to him, "Courage, the war will be soon over." And my father, coming back to tell this to the group, gave us hope. It was a very welcome remark.
You found, through Werner, a document that lists the people that were with you on that transport?
On that transport from, we were 20 people.
And this is an original, this is a photocopy of an original?
Photocopy of an original.
Can you point to your name and your father's name on the list?
We're right here. Here's Max and Judith.
Do you know where you were going?
We knew we were going to Theresienstadt, yes. The trip was roughly 2 days. We were asked at that time also to take some food with us, which we did. The escort was, if you can say, decent.
These were SS guards or SA guards?
Those were non-speaking Germans. Those were either Sudetendeutsche who came from Czechoslovakia or some other country. They were all right, and the man in charge, well, he also knew the war would soon be finished, was rather all right.
Mm-hmm.
There was no yelling or screaming, it was just a normal train ride.
The train on its way to Theresienstadt stops in Prague. And here you mention in your memoirs that you have a decision to make. What was the decision?
Well, it would have been very simple to get out of that train and sit with the rest of the people who wanted to go west. We went east. Russians were approaching, so the people living in this area fled from the Russians. And my father and I, we discussed, should we just walk out of the train and sit with the rest of the people? And then we said to ourselves, we don't have any documentation. If the Russians come and overtake, how did the Russians know that we are Jews on the way to a concentration camp and not Germans like the rest of them? Mm-hmm. And we felt it would be best to sit in a train, continue the journey.
You arrive at Theresienstadt. What did you know about the camp?
Well, there was so much propaganda. As a matter of fact, I have seen a film about it. Mm-hmm. Because once in a while, I covered my Jewish star and sneaked into a movie house. And there was a film shown, and it said Der Hitler schenkt den Juden eine Stadt. Translation, Hitler presents the Jew with their own city. And there was a lot of propaganda that you even could buy houses. That's how they extracted some more money from Jews, that you could buy your own house, that there were theaters, that there were stores. It was basically a home for elderly and privileged people.
And did you believe the propaganda?
Not all of it, but part of it, yes.
And when you arrived there, was it anything like they had described in the movie houses?
Well, there were stores, but it was just a frontage, just a window, no stores. There was a theater, and a place where played when the Red Cross came or somebody came to inspect. There were no barracks. We lived in houses, caserne type, where soldiers used to live. It could not be compared to a Buchenwald or Auschwitz under no circumstances. It was a ghetto in which people died of hunger.
What happened in those first few hours when you arrived?
We had to get off the train with our suitcases, walk quite a distance, walk under an archway on which was written, Arbeit macht frei. Work liberates you. This was nearly above every concentration camp. We walked through this door and we went into some kind of Theresienstadt is a walled city. So we went in one of those places within that wall, which was the reception for new arrivals. There are many signs, on one of them which says, we know you have some money hidden. Retrieve it, put it in a box, or you'll be severely punished. And there I was, 17 years old, no father to consult with.
Why did you not have a father to consult with?
Because we were separated from men. Male and females were separated.
This happened in the first few hours that you arrived?
First few hours, yeah.
How did they separate you?
Male one side, female the other side.
A guard separated you?
Mm-hmm.
And was he violent or?
Not really,
no.
And then I was there, remembering that my mother sewed some money into my brassiere. And there I read this sign, I'm 17, scared, no father to talk to. I said to myself, how much can that little money which I have in my brassiere help me? And I decided to remove it and put it in a box. We then had to get undressed and be what they call deloused with TNT powder. You were sprayed over, and they looked if you had lice and whatever. You just came from your own home, but it was one of their procedures. And then we had to take a shower and then come out, and I was elated when I saw my clothes.
Why?
Because I knew in a concentration camp that I had seen those striped dresses. I'd seen on the street when bombs had to be defused. They used people from concentration camps. I had seen those uniforms. So I was elated at least to have could go back to my own dresses.
You were separated from your father. Were you afraid for his life?
Yeah.
You were afraid for your own life?
Yeah.
Were you able to communicate with him at all?
Not on that day. We were taken to some kind of a house and slept in triple bunks in some kind of a straw mat. and they had millions of fleas and bedbugs there. Needless to say, I didn't sleep that night because I was wondering what's happening to my father, what is going to happen to me tomorrow. Plus the bed bugs and the lice and fleas attacked me. So I was totally swollen. My eyes were nearly closed from all these bites. The next morning, we were asked to report to pick up our luggage. And to my delight, I saw my father. He was there.
He was alive.
He was alive. He was there.
And did you have a chance to speak to him?
I decided to speak to him. I told him about the money, and he thought it was a wise thing for me to do. And he says, you remember, don't volunteer for anything. Don't trust people.
Don't make wishes.
Don't make wishes. Don't be anxious. Be very calm. Be very quiet. And then he was roomed with 12 or 14 other men, and one of the males was Werner Gruber. He appeared again
Into your life.
in my life, yeah.
There were other people that you recognized in Theresienstadt. Dr. Spania was there from the Jewish hospital. Did he remember you?
Yes. We ran in Dr. Spania, and it was a wonderful delight. We did not ask what happened to all the other people, and he didn't tell us.
Did he have a position of authority within the camp, or was
yes, he was
as
the
a doctor,
chief doctor. Yeah, he was the chief doctor there.
to look after the other?
To look after when you were ill and so on. It was again, as I explained before, administered by Jews. In Theresienstadt, they had their own money. They gave food stamps, no food, but you got food stamps. You got some kind of a pay, but you couldn't buy anything with it. It was all a farce, you know.
So very little food.
Very little food.
You mentioned the vermin. There was disease.
There was disease. The vermin, I was fortunate because I was assigned to look after orphaned children. And I was fortunate to live in a house, in that house where the children were located. And I had a room upstairs. And the first night I went up to this room, I heard thumping on the steps. And when I opened the door and I looked out, I saw dozens of rats of an enormous size around there.
You mentioned at one point a large commotion, and you heard from someone that the camp had been liberated.
There was a commotion, and people were cheering, and people were laughing, and my father's warning came to mind. Be careful, don't trust, watch out, don't be hasty, look. And it was a false alarm.
People thought that they had been liberated.
I don't know if the Germans spread the word themselves so they could shoot or do something, but it was a false alarm.
And what happened?
People were shot. In April, the Red Cross came for inspection.
Mm-hmm.
And the city was again spruced up as much as they could. There was food in the store windows, but no store behind it. There was much more food from in the soup kitchens than we ever had. You know, there was another loaf of bread issued. Someone walked around what we could see from the Red Cross. The Swedish Red Cross and the International Red Cross. I said to my father, can't they see? Can't they see? And my father said, today's a day where we have more bread and where we have more soup. They can't do anything right now.
What were some of the most terrifying moments being in this camp at Theresienstadt?
I was ordered to go to the theater and look at the Tales of Hoffmann.
What was the Tales of Hoffmann?
There was this a piece of a theater, piece of a
Live theater.
live theater, live
Strange.
theater.
In a camp, as a
They
prisoner, to
had
be
live
ordered
theater,
for.
and we stood there, and for 2 hours, we forgot everything.
Mm-hmm.
It was just wonderful. And then we came out of that theater.
What did you see?
Cattle cars of skeletons,
Dead
some
people?
dead and some alive,
Living skeletons.
living skeletons. They emptied, as the Allied approached concentration camps, the Germans emptied concentration camps and put them what was called after the death march. And we had, according to the records, 13,450 of these inmates from other concentration camps come to Theresienstadt. My father, you're shocked. You don't know what to do. You stand in front of this. And I saw somewhere my father standing there. And he says, we must help them. And there comes Dr. Spanier in the picture again. Dr. Spanier was in charge of what to do with those 13,450 bodies, some of them dead, some of them alive.
Barely alive.
And we went to Dr. Spanier and says, we are here to help. And Dr. Spanier then, and there were a few other doctors, they separated. Well, the dead had to be moved. Werner Gruber was at that time 15 years old. He was assigned to bring the dead people to a certain place. And then the living people were taken into the barracks. And then within those barracks, they did again a triage. The ones who might survive and the ones who are going to die within the next hour or day. And we tried to comfort them. They were full of flies and we had no food, but we had water, and we tried to wash them a little bit and put water on their heads and give them a little bit of water. And Dr. Spanier showed me how to inject people, and I don't know what I injected the people with, but he gave me a syringe to inject the people. He showed me which ones and showed me how to do it.
A lot of those patients died? You saw them die?
The majority died.
May 8th, 1945.
What a sight. Russian soldiers and horses entered the concentration camp.
The Germans, what happened to them?
The Germans, the commandant left 3 days prior to this in full uniform.
He knew they were coming?
He knew they were coming, but he left in uniform. The others left in civilian clothing.
But this day must have been
That day was elation. It was an elation, you know. The Russians, I recall a Russian soldier. I was on the window of this children's home, looking out of the window, and he was roughly on his horseback, the height of the window. And he had a loaf of bread, and he cut it in half. And he cut his sugar portion, which he had, in half, and he gave it to me. And then I fed the children bread and sugar. which was another beautiful thing to see.
You mentioned one Russian soldier. On the whole, were they decent?
Very decent, very compassionate, very wonderful people, very wonderful people. I recall that the barracks were barbed wired to keep the people in the barracks because it was detected that most of them had typhoid. And the Russians, when they came, they cut a wire because they thought it was a concentration camp. And then the typhoid infected people came out and infected more people. So unfortunately, the war was finished and people started to die of typhoid. Also, not only of typhoid, but also whatever they could find to eat. They were so hungry, they ate and they couldn't digest it. And then they died too.
You must have been thinking at this point, it's got to get back home. So what was the next move?
Unfortunately, because there was typhoid in the home, in the Theresienstadt, they did not release any people. So now you're liberated, you're anxious to go home, you wait for news, is your mother still alive? And you can't go. And no communication, just nothing. Werner Gruber, he went with a couple of young men. They just tried to find their way back home, which was not a good thing because he had caught typhoid and he nearly died. But he survived.
They survived.
So we sat there for weeks. In the meantime, the Red Cross came. First week, there wasn't much change as far as food was concerned, but then there were supplementary food. You still had your soups and your piece of bread, but instead of one, you could have soup.
As much
As you wanted, yeah. But it was anxious moments. People became very anxious and nervous. And then buses started to roll in a city. I still don't know who organized the buses because the Germans had their hands full. Americans had other things to do. There were no Jewish organizations. So I really don't know, and I never investigated who really organized those buses to bring the people home. Munich was a long time coming. And we were very disappointed that the city of Munich did not send a bus. They sent some kind of a truck with benches built on that truck. So we came home in an open truck. But at least we went on the way home. We were on the way home. It took us 2 days to go back home. And
by back home, you were going to the...
What a sight. I asked one of the persons who escorted the truck. He was a school friend of mine, who, by the way, who gave me messages from my mother. In the meantime, in the truck, I knew my mother was alive. And he said, we are going back to Lindrumstrasse 125. And when the truck moved in,
What did you see?
my mother, with flowers in her hand, and it was the first time that I allowed myself to cry.
And you broke down?
But we were together. What a wonderful feeling.
A relief.
What a relief. We had my mother still had the apartment on Rumfortstrasse, so we went back to the same place we left before we went to the concentration camp. So we were home.
And Ruth, your sister?
My sister, in the meantime, in England, had also a very difficult life, uh, different from mine, but very difficult, not knowing whether we are alive or not. Um, she got married and had one son, and my mother wrote a letter. It was written on July 23rd, 1945. My dear Ruth, through a friend of Judith's, we were able at last to send you a letter. I received the letter dated January 45 via the Red Cross on April the 25th and congratulate you heartily on your wedding held on September 5th, 44. The good news about you expecting a baby made us very happy. I'm with you in my thoughts. I hope your husband is with you. Give him our greetings. Thanks to God, we are again together since June 25. Father and Judith were away for 5 months in Theresien's concentration camp and only just escaped death. I was alone at that terrible time and had great worries. Now we have 12 years of persecution behind us, and Father will be able to make a decent living, and we will be living in a decent home again. Tante Bertel married in 45. Uncle Friedel and Egon are well. Hoping to hear from you soon. Greetings and kisses also to your husband, your mother. My father wrote, thank God he deserves our gratitude, that after 12 years of horror and trials, our family is alive and united. We look forward as a family to a new happy existence. Dearest daughter, blessings to you on your wedding. Many greetings to your husband who offered a stranger his hand. He can only be a noble man in acting this way. Judith and I experienced many difficulties, but we stuck together, thus we survived. She's a splendid daughter and we'll find her happiness. Our dear mother had suffered a lot, but now she's happy.
The war is over. What was it like to readjust in this post-war world?
Well, my father, being a realist and an optimist, it wasn't that difficult. My father said we just have to start from scratch. We never ever talked about the past. I don't know if my father talked to my mother about it, but my father and I, we never talked about it
Together between
together. When I met later on my sister, we were wondering why our father, who is such a good writer and storyteller, didn't tell us. And we can only imagine that he wanted to forget the past. That was it. And now we are here. Now we have to
Looking
start.
back, how do you feel towards Germans?
Bitter. So bitter. I definitely did not want to stay in Germany. After the war, all I really wanted is marry, have children, and live just a normal life. That was my whole aspiration, ambition. I found a good husband who came over with the occupation army, also Jewish. He helped me a lot to find back my self-esteem because I had absolutely none. He helped us a lot, my parents, to get back on our feet.
But you still
Then-
didn't talk about the war, the Holocaust?
Never told him, no. Then I became pregnant. So, and my husband had an assignment to stay in Germany. so we had to stay in Germany. It was a good life. I had everything I wanted, from maid to chauffeur, you name it.
How bizarre after having that.
It was a life, I could do anything I wanted. My husband earned US dollars. He had access to, while Germans were starving, he had access to the soldiers got all their supplies. I had beautiful clothes, everything. And I was a very unhappy person, very unhappy. Then we were ready to go. The assignment was finished, and then I became pregnant again. And we really didn't want to leave with me being pregnant. So
Pregnant with my mother.
pregnant with your mother. So then we waited until, and then I had lots of disappointments. What I saw with Americans, with the occupation army, I was disappointed how big Nazis basically got away with very little punishment. It was a big disappointment for me, and I really didn't. As a matter of fact, I didn't want to come to the States. That's why I chose to go to Canada. I felt it was a more tranquil country. And we finally decided then to apply for Canada, and took a few months. And the children were small. Your mother was 2, and her sister 5. And we started a new life in Canada. It wasn't easy. As a matter of fact, it was difficult. But we found our way.
Over the years, despite your loss of self-esteem, as you described, despite your bitterness, you were very successful in the business world, working in hotels, rising up to high-level executive positions. You opened up your own consulting practice for the hospitality industry. How did you overcome your bitterness, your self-esteem issues to be able to do this?
As I say, my husband helped me a lot. And once I had my self-esteem, I was determined. I knew I had very little education, and a lot of things I had to become very streetwise. As a matter of fact, I was teaching for 14 years summer courses at Cornell University. So I was teaching university, graduates on a university level. But I think sheer determination, not let yourself be dragged down, and just go on.
I know as I grew up as a kid, you would speak in little bits and pieces about the experience, but never really understood the whole story. And when I was in Montreal going to McGill, my final years there, I was taking Holocaust studies because of your background. I wanted to know more, and had a professor, Professor Lindemann, who was associated with the Spielberg Project, and we talked about doing a video document, a video testimony 10 years ago, and you'd organized through him a session to sit down, and you canceled the session.
I backed out.
You backed out. Why?
I just felt I couldn't sit in front of a stranger asking me questions about things he didn't know about. I just felt I couldn't do it. But I promised you that I will write my memoirs.
Which you did.
Which I did.
And here we are today.
And here we are today.
Telling the testimony.
Telling the testimony.
The story that comes as a postscript to all this is almost as strange as your experience in the Holocaust itself.
That is.
You get a call from your sister on November 14th, 2004. You haven't really spent much time researching or digging into your past, understanding it, but now everything kind of changes. What did your sister tell you on the phone?
My sister called me and said, Judith, someone called me by the name of Werner Gruber, who said he knows you. He said he was with you in the children's home. He was working with you in the battery factory. He was with you in the Rasenstadt. And he wanted your address, and I gave it to him, and he wants to speak to you. He's calling you tomorrow morning. Do you know him? And I said, no.
You didn't
Don't
remember
remember.
Werner? He was younger than you.
He was a few years younger than I am, yeah.
So the next day you get a call from Werner.
So next day I get a call from Werner, and his beginning was, do you remember me? And I says, to tell you the truth, no. He said to me, I was the smallest in the children's home, and I'm still the smallest because he's a very short little man.
Mm-hmm.
And I started, it was a good joke, and I laughed, and he says, do you remember anyone from the children's home? And I said, yes. And he says, who do you remember? And I says, I remember my boyfriend, Irvin Weil.
Mm-hmm.
I remember Esther Cohen. I remembered Mary Garber. I remember Dora Schmidt. And I rattled off a few other names, And then he says, I have to tell you a very strange story.
It's an amazing story.
And a very amazing story. He says, in front of the former Antonienheim is a memorial which he was responsible for and worked on for 3 years to have it erected. And he says there are 2 girls on this memorial.
It's a photographic image.
A photographic image. And that photograph is etched into glass. One of the girls is May, and the other one Mary Garber. I was flabbergasted. I just couldn't believe it that there is a memorial of myself, and of all people, Mary Garber, who looked at me as her big sister, at times as her mother, that we should be together in that memorial. And Mary was murdered in Auschwitz.
Mm-hmm.
And it was hard to believe that this happened.
But it's through this memorial that Werner was able to track you down.
But through this memorial, Werner was able to track me down because on November 9th, 2004, there was some ceremony for the remembrance of Kristallnacht. And one woman by the name of Inge Sadan, who went with Werner to school, came to remember it. And the group was taken to this memorial. And Inge Sadan asked Werner, who are the 2 girls?
Mm-hmm.
And he says, well, one is Mary Garber. She was murdered in Auschwitz. The other one is Judith Hirsch. She's a survivor, but we lost track of her. So Inge Sadan said to Werner, my sister is the president of the Kindertransport in London, and she met someone by the name of Hirsch. I wonder if they're related. So Werner and Inge went to the archive department in Munich. They looked up my file, and in my file was written that I had a sister who was sent to England with the Kindertransport. So then they called Inge's sister, who had my sister's phone number, and called my sister and asked her, do you know someone by the name of Judith Hirsch?
And that's how he got to you.
And that's how he got to me.
Now what's even more interesting is where the photo itself comes from.
And the photos, while Werner was working on this memorial, he was quoted in a newspaper saying that he and his siblings are the only living survivors from the Antoninheim. And Werner received a phone call from a gentleman. He says, "You know, you're not the only one, because my nephew, by the name of Erwin Weil, who lives in another city, was also in the Antoninheim." So Werner contacted Erwin and spoke with him, and Erwin mentioned that he had many photos and letters from his first girlfriend, Judith Hirsch. So Werner asked Erwin, "Please mail me all the information."
Mm-hmm.
When it came to decide on the memorial, what should be written on it, what should be used, how should the memorial look like, one of the 5 artists chosen shows this picture. And it shows 2 girls looking out of a window from the Antoninheim. The artist was so taken with this picture because he felt it represented youth, whose youth was stolen.
Mm-hmm.
And he designed a memorial, which is this. And it is now in front of Antonienstraße 7.
And it's this memorial that brought
And it's this memorial which
all
brought
of you
me
together.
to what brought all of us together.
So you decided to make a trip to reunite and left for Karlsruhe in late April 2005. In parallel, the Bürgermeister of Munich, the mayor, received word from the archivist who was working with Werner that you were going to be coming to Germany.
Yes. So I got a letter from the Bürgermeister who said they're delighted that I come after so many years back to Munich, and if I would accept their invitation to be their guest in Munich. I spoke with my family,
Yeah.
who was all excited, and in unison they said, "We all come with you," which I did. Your mother and her sister, you and your sister and your cousin Gregory went along to Munich. However, I felt emotionally that I need to be there first. I felt I couldn't handle it. So I decided to go first for 2 days to Karlsruhe,
Mm-hmm.
visit my girlfriend, whose father was very good to us. Then spent 3 days with Werner in Munich, and we revisited all these various places.
You saw the memorial.
Saw the memorial.
How did you feel in this moment when you saw it?
Well, I felt very proud. I felt very honored. I felt good that the Jewish children, I felt delighted that the Jewish children are not forgotten.
And that the artist had done.
And the artist had done a wonderful, wonderful job. Werner took me through all the various places, and is there such a word, that empty myself emotionally, because I did not want my children to see me stand in front of those buildings and cry. I went to this hospital, Jewish hospital. In my mind's eye, I saw 2 furniture vans. I was glad I was alone there with Werner.
Mm-hmm.
And we went to Bergheim-Leim. It's now a home for retired nuns, and we introduced ourselves, and the nun in charge wanted to invited us to have coffee with her. She had said she had heard about what happened, and she was telling me, I'm sure you will be pleased to hear that every November 9th we walk the grounds with candles in our house and think of all those many people which were taken away, taken, murdered. Um, she was very kind.
And shortly thereafter, your family arrives, and
Shortly after my family
yeah.
arrives, they arrived all on the same day. I had Werner organized with his brother 2 cars. We were very short on time. We had Thursday, Friday. We had 3 days together, so much to see. So we took you straight off the plane and we went to Dachau.
And then we visited all these sites that you had seen the last 3 days. Saw
we
the
went
memorial.
to visit,
Powerful.
and I told you the story, what happened. And I could see on my daughters' faces that they finally understood. My life was so complex and there was so much in it, they couldn't connect it. And only standing in front of the buildings and me telling the story there. And you told me it happened to you too.
Absolutely. It was, even though I'd read your parts of your memoirs at this point and had spoken about different bits and pieces of the story, never did it all come together quite like it did in those 3 days. It was a real powerful moment to really get your head around what was a very complex and hard to understand set of events.
And what's so wonderful, what I find is so wonderful, that in my age, you lose friends. And what I find so wonderful is that I found old friends and made new friends. And many of them are Germans.
How do you feel about Germans now?
After having met the people we met, most of them were educators. Most of them had parents who were Nazis. And this generation want to do good.
You feel that?
They are very involved with many Jewish projects. There are no Jews who can be involved with. Werner is, like me, one of the last of that generation who can tell. So they will take over and they will continue.
I noticed in you two, coming out of this trip, a shift in how you told the story. Before, you were being encouraged by people, me among them, to tell the story, but it didn't really come from inside you. After
Now,
this trip,
I want to tell the story.
you want to tell it?
I was so thrilled when your mother called me a few months ago and asked me if I would go to the high school in Stowe, Vermont, and speak to 60 14-year-olds about my past. I put a lot of work into it, and
Something you couldn't have done before.
No.
Going back.
And I stood in front of those, never told a story before to individuals, never mind to a group of 60 people. And I stood in front of those 60 young people. When I started, I dedicated the time and the place to the 1.5 million Jewish children who were murdered. And when I started to tell my story, you could hear a pin drop. They were taken aback. They were just, they barely took a break and they wanted to come back, and were kind of sad when the 2 hours were over. I had received a wonderful letter from the teacher who felt a survivor telling the story, life story, surpasses any book or any hours of lecturing. And the letters I received from those children, how it opened their eyes to listen to a survivor, was rewarding. Very rewarding.
You worked with children throughout the war. You have the opportunity now to speak to children about your experiences there and to teach them about it firsthand. Is there anything you want to tell your children, my grandchildren, and the generations that come after them about your experience, or anything at all?
I want to tell them, be a survivor. Don't give up. After I'm gone, there's no one to tell the story. So you do. It must be told. It cannot be forgotten. Unfortunately, the world has not learned. Today, people are murdered because of religion and races. Fight it. That's all I have to say.